In today's video, going to be going through my prediction map of the governorships for the midterms here upcoming in November of 2018. And there's 26 matchups that I think are worth at least discussing a little bit and then giving a prediction on. On top of that, we have 3 in the safe hands of Democrats in California, New York, and Hawaii, and then 7 in safe hands of the Republicans in Indiana, Wyoming, Nebraska, Texas, Arkansas, Alabama, as well as Massachusetts. And you might say, well, Massachusetts, they're a very Democrat-leaning state. How can they be safe for the Republicans? Based on the polling, it has been looking very strong for their favorable governor out there, and it would be a shock if he wasn't able to go on and keep that one in the state of Massachusetts for the Republicans, that being Charlie Baker. So in between that, we have 26 more races that I'm going to be talking about. Some of these are more closer to that toss-up range than others, but still warrant somewhat of a discussion. So we're going to start out in the West here, over in the state of Oregon. And the Democrats have the incumbency advantage with Kate Brown. You definitely give her the lean over Bueller, the Republican. In what's likely to be a strong year for Democratic voter turnout, it would be pretty shocking if they weren't able to keep this one. It's definitely in that likely Democratic range, so that's how we're going to label the state of Oregon. Now, moving down to Nevada, which might be the most competitive governor's race that we see on the board here in the midterms. There's no incumbency advantage. All the polling has been really close between the Republican Lizolt, I think is how you pronounce his name, and then Sisolak on the Democrats' side. Should be likely within about a 1 to 2 percentage points one way or the other, kind of like the Senate race that we're also going to get in Nevada between incumbent Dean Heller and challenger Jackie Rosen. Nevada, they also have a lot of interesting congressional races, and it seems like this state, which is already kind of a lean Democratic state, is going to have really strong turnout in a lot of these competitive congressional races for the Democrats. Maybe that pushes Rosen over the line. Maybe that also pushes Sisolak over the line as well. If this was a presidential year, you definitely give the stronger lean over to the Democrats to possibly take this one. In a midterm year, that can be affected a little bit by weaker turnout in general, but again, that strong Democratic voter turnout that we're expecting, I think plays a role here and perhaps pushes Steve Sisolak over the line and gives this governorship over to the Democrats, but it's going to be extremely close. Moving down to Arizona, they have another interesting Senate matchup that's going to be between Kyrsten Sinema, the moderate Democrat, and then she's taking on Martha McSally, the Republican. In Arizona, the governor's race, the Republicans have the incumbency advantage with Doug Ducey, and he's being challenged by a more progressive Democrat, David Garcia. I'm actually fascinated to see how this dynamic plays out in Arizona, where you have the statewide elections where a progressive Democrat is challenging an incumbent. A very tough situation. You give him an outside chance at maybe picking up this upset, and then the Senate race where you have a more moderate Democrat, centrist Democrat going and being challenged by the Republicans. We'll see which Democrat is able to have more success in that type of scenario. You'd give in the governorship race here with Doug Ducey, who's a pretty favorable governor within the state of Arizona, has that incumbency advantage. Also, Arizona is still a lean Republican state. At the end of the day, you would probably say that this is going to be a likely Republican seat that they hold on to in the state of Arizona. Next, we'll move over to Colorado. No incumbency advantage on either side. Jared Polis has been looking really strong in the polling data. He's being challenged by Walker Stapleton. And Colorado, they don't have a Senate matchup on the board, but still a number of interesting congressional races. That's going to encourage a lot of voter turnout. And again, those polls have been pretty solid for Polis, and Colorado continues to be more and more of a Democratic state on a year-to-year basis. We'll see if that trend continues into the future, but one there where we definitely give the lean over to the Democrats in what's a likely Democratic scenario with that race. And then moving down to New Mexico, again, no incumbency advantage, where you have Lujan Grisham, the Democrat, and then Pierce, the Republican. And again, the polling data has generally been more solid for the Democrats in this race. New Mexico, a Democrat-leaning state, you'd probably give this one the favor to the Democrats in a likely scenario for them to hold on to that one. Now we'll move over into the Plain states. We got South Dakota. Again, no incumbency advantage. We have Noam, the Republican, Sutton, the Democrat, and this is a lean Republican state, certainly, and one of those situations in the northern plains where, for whatever reason, sometimes these governor's races are a bit closer than you would typically expect in states that go extremely Republican in presidential years. Sutton's going to have an uphill battle here, and the polling data has generally been looking better for the Republicans in this matchup, and we'd probably give this one as a likely Republican at this point in time. Moving down to Kansas, another one of what's likely to be the most competitive governor's matchups on the board here in these midterms. You have the poster child of voter suppression in the Republican Chris Kobach being challenged by Democrat Laura Kelly. And in the state of Kansas, they've had, of course, Brownback, the Republican governor, who did not put the state in the best financial position. He drastically cut taxes for corporations and the wealthy. That made it so they couldn't invest in much in things like public education. I think that has alienated a lot of independent voters, and what's also making this a more competitive matchup between the Democrats and Republicans. I think that has a big difference maker here. Potentially, you're going to get some very strong voter turnout in more Democratic parts of the state, like the Kansas City area. That's likely to drastically boost Kelly's chances in this one. Should be extremely close, probably within about 2 percentage points one way or the other, but I actually think that the Democrats can pick this one up over Chris Kobach, who's not looked at, especially in terms of independent voters, as the necessarily best person for this job. So we'll see how that plays out. And basically a coin flip at this point in time, but I'd give the lean to the Democrats. Moving down to Oklahoma. Oklahoma, it's clearly a very lean Republican state overall. Actually, in the primaries, though, the turnout between Democrats and Republicans wasn't too far off between themselves. Oklahoma, they actually do have a lot of registered Democrats, though, so that's not an extremely huge surprise. This is definitely one that we would keep in a likely Republican category, with Stitt, the Republican, taking on Edmondson, the Democrat. Not completely out of the realm of possibility, and likely to be within about a single-digit race or so, but I think Edmondson is going to have a hard time getting over the line here on Election Day in what is a very conservative state overall in Oklahoma. So we're going to be giving this one as a likely Republican. Moving up to Minnesota, no incumbency advantage. You have Walz, the Democrat, taking on Johnson, the Republican. We saw tremendously strong turnout for the Democratic Party in the primaries in Minnesota. I think that carries over into the general election. There's a lot of interesting congressional races as well in Minnesota, where we're likely to see some very strong voter turnout. And I think Walz, the Democrat, goes on to take this one in what's a likely Democratic seat. Moving down to Iowa, the Republicans have the incumbency advantage with Kim Reynolds being taken on by Fred Hubbell, the Democrat, but actually the polling data has been very strong for Hubbell, the Democrat. Iowa has 4 congressional districts, and at this point it looks like the Democrats are likely to win at least 3 of these districts, if not all 4 of them. It's looking like it could potentially be a very strong midterms for the Democratic Party in the state of Iowa, which is a state in the Midwest that has definitely gone one way or the other, actually fairly drastically. For Obama in 2008, he won by about 10 percentage points. Trump this time around in 2016 won by about 10 percentage points. So you can see there's a lot of independent voters in this state that swing one way or the other based on how things are going in what's likely to be a really solid year for the Democratic Party overall. You definitely look for them to take this governorship in the state of Iowa, even against an incumbent. Labeling this one right now as a likely Democratic win, certainly based on that polling data that we've seen. Now moving on over to Wisconsin, which is, again, another one of those states that's likely to be one of the most competitive results. You have incumbent Republican Scott Walker being challenged by Tony Evers, the Democrat. All the polling for this one has been relatively close, but almost always has been siding with the Democrats. And Wisconsin, for whatever reason, they seem to always have their polls where they're a little bit more favorable for the Democrats than we actually get on Election Day, at least in the past decade or so. And we definitely saw that in the 2016 presidential election between Clinton and Trump, where Clinton was always ahead in the polls in Wisconsin, but then Trump was able to win the state overall. But even if you factor that in, you'd still probably give the lean to the Democrats at the end of the day, and what we label as a very small lean for the Democrats in the state of Wisconsin. We'll see how that one plays out, and what's one of those races that is likely to be one of the more competitive results on the governor's map. All right, now we'll move down to one state south of that in Illinois. And you have the incumbent on the Republican side with Rauner, the Republican, being challenged by Pritzker, the Democrat. And the fact that the Republicans have the incumbency advantage is probably the only reason why this isn't put in a safe Democratic situation. But Pritzker has been consistently ahead in the polls. He also has the financial ability to really make a big impact, just like he did back in the primaries. And it would be pretty surprising if the Democrats weren't able to flip this one back over and take it from the incumbent Republican. This one we're going to be labeling as a likely Democratic governor's seat. Moving over to Michigan, there's no incumbency advantage. Snyder moving on. And Snyder's Republican Party in Michigan did a lot of damage, specifically in terms of the Flint water crisis that a lot of voters, especially in the large population centers of Michigan, aren't going to be quickly forgiving the Republican Party for. You have Bill Schuette, the Republican, taking on Gretchen Whitmer, the Democrat. Also, another one of these Midwestern states, kind of like Minnesota, where during primary season we saw extremely strong turnout for the Democratic Party. I think that also carries over here and into the general election. All the polling data has shown Whitmer consistently ahead. We're labeling this one as very likely for the Democrats. Moving down to Ohio, which is going to, again, be one of these extremely close races. You have DeWine, the Republican, Cordray, the Democrat. Neither is going to be an incumbent situation. And all of the polling data has been basically split right down the line. And another statewide election that we're getting in Ohio is the Senate race between Sherrod Brown and Renacci. And Brown is likely to win by around double digits, maybe 10 percentage points or more. I think that that has a positive effect on this governor's race, potentially for the Democrats. They get a lot of turnout for that Senate race. They can carry that over into this governor's matchup with Cordray. Probably going to be within about 1 or 2 percentage points. Extremely close one we're keeping our eye on, but we give our slight lean right now to the Democrats with Cordray. Moving over to Pennsylvania, the Democrats have the incumbency advantage here with Tom Wolf being taken on by Scott Wagner, the Republican. And it would be a surprise, I would say, if the Democrats weren't able to win this one by at least around 10 percentage points. They have the incumbency advantage, and based on the polling and other data, we feel like this is also going to be in that likely Democratic scenario. And now we'll move south here a little bit down to Tennessee. No incumbency advantage. You have Bill Lee, the Republican, and then Carl Dean, the Democrat. The Democrats, kind of a long shot in this one, not completely out of the realm of possibility, especially with a competitive Senate matchup on the board, but you would expect Bill Lee to probably go on and take this one, putting that one in the likely Republican hands. All right, so next we'll move over to the Southeast, and then we'll finish things up with the East and then go into the Northeast. We have 10 governor's races left. So we'll go down to Georgia, expected to be an extremely close race within about 1 or 2 percentage points. All of the polling data has been extremely tight in Georgia, a state that's very diverse. Also, in terms of the Southeastern states, a lot of population around large metropolitan areas, specifically the Atlanta region, which has a more liberalizing effect, which is why Georgia is generally a bit more competitive than some of these other Southeastern states. Stacey Abrams, there's likely to be a very strong African-American vote turnout in Georgia, which could possibly get her over the line against Brian Kemp. Based on the fact that Georgia is pretty inelastic, with Republicans tending to win races by single digits, but more to the 5 to 10 percentage point range than the 1 to 5 percentage point range, I think that elasticity in that Republican vote is just enough to get Kemp over the line, but would not be surprised to see Abrams win this one. We're going to give it as a slight lean right now to the Republicans. And then South Carolina, we have the incumbency advantage with Henry McMaster taking on James Smith, the Democrat. The Democrat is definitely in the longer shot scenario here. Not completely out of their own possibility, maybe to get this one within single digits and competitive, but one where we're giving it as very likely here to the Republicans. Moving down to Florida, which is perhaps one of the more interesting matchups on the board of all these governorships. You have a Bernie Sanders-style Democrat and Andrew Gillum, and then a Trump-style Republican in Ron DeSantis. The polling data has consistently looked like it's been favoring Gillum. Also, Gillum's going to encourage a lot of voter turnout here in the midterms that maybe don't necessarily always turn out in midterm years in comparison to presidential years, or just less politically active people. That's likely to have a positive carryover effect potentially for the Senate race for the Democrats as well, but one where we're giving the slight lean right now over to the Democrats, which would be an extremely close race. Now we'll move up to Maryland. And Larry Hogan, a very favorable incumbent Republican governor, even though Maryland is one of the more stronger Democrat-leaning states across the country. For whatever reason, they went with a Republican as the governor, and now he is currently viewed as very favorable. He has that name recognition. It's going to be very tough for the Democrats to try to take this one over with Ben Jealous, who's a progressive politician. I think the fact that he has an affirmative progressive message can help him in this race. And I think that the prognosticators might be underselling Ben Jealous's chance at picking up this upset, especially in a strong year for Democratic voter turnout, specifically in a state like Maryland, is probably going to have a positive effect on this governor's race for Ben Jealous. We'll see how that plays out. If he can get it within single digits, that would be pretty impressive in comparison to the polls that we've been generally seeing him down by about 20 percentage points or so. We'll see how that one plays out, but one where we're definitely going to be giving the current lean to likely range over to the Republicans. All right, just 6 seats left to go here. Moving up into the Northeast, we'll go to Connecticut next. No incumbency advantage. Ned Lamont, the Democrat, taking on Stefanowski, the Republican. Based on the primary data that we saw in this one, as well as the fact that Connecticut is a lean Democratic state, you'd give right now the likelihood to the Democrats to take this one, especially just across the board in Connecticut. They're likely to win every single congressional race. That probably has an effect on this governor's matchup as well. So we'll put that one in the likely Democratic hands. And then kind of a similar situation over to Rhode Island, except the Democrats, on top of everything, have the incumbency advantage. Raimondo isn't necessarily the most favorable incumbent governor for the Democrats, but in a very Democrat-leaning state, taking on Alan Fung, the Republican, it would be a surprise if the Democrats weren't able to keep this one. We'll put that one as well in likely Democratic hands. And 3 states left, 3 up here in the Northeast, and then we'll close things out with Alaska. So Vermont could be kind of a fascinating scenario because all of the other statewide elections or congressional districts are going to be in very strong Democratic hands, but the governor's race, they have the incumbency advantage with the Republicans and Phil Scott, taking on by Democrat progressive here, Christine Hallquist. Hallquist being supported by Bernie Sanders could have a carryover effect, and Sanders, he's going to encourage a lot of Democratic voter turnout, which could also have an effect in what's a small population state. Hallquist did a lot better in the primary results than we saw from Scott, but that isn't a huge surprise considering the differential in Democratic voters in the state of Vermont compared to Republicans. But still one that we're going to be giving the likelihood to the Republicans to keep this one with their favorable incumbent governor, but not completely out of the realm of possibility that the Democrats could possibly pick up an upset there. Moving over to New Hampshire, the incumbent Republican Chris Sununu being challenged by Molly Kelly, the Democrat, and kind of a similar situation to Vermont where it's an incumbency advantage for the Republicans and a fairly favorable governor as well in these very lean Democratic states, but New Hampshire a little bit less so than some of these other Northeastern states. We're going to be giving that one as a likelihood over to the Republicans. And then moving up to the state of Maine, no incumbency advantage. We have Jeanette Mills, the Democrat, taking on Sean Moody, the Republican. The polling data has been pretty solid for the Democrats in this one, and it is looking like what is a more lean Democratic state is probably going to be going with Jeanette Mills in this scenario, and we're going to be putting that one in likely Democratic hands. And just one more state to talk about, one of the more interesting ones potentially out in the state of Alaska, where the incumbent independent governor, Bill Walker, could possibly even finish in 3rd place, even though he doesn't necessarily have the worst approval numbers by any means. But you have a Democrat on the ballot who's going to be taking a lot of vote that might have otherwise gone to Bill Walker, that being Mark Begich. And then you have Republican Mike Dunleavy, who could possibly win this one with less than 40% of the vote, given this split ticket aspect of these 3 candidates. When you have the incumbent as the independent who's likely to get a lot of vote, he has that name recognition, but then you have Democrats and Republicans getting their bases to vote for them as well. It's just going to be a messy situation. At the end of the day, that's likely to favor the Republicans here and Mike Dunleavy. So we're going to be putting that one in a likely Republican range right now, just the fact that a lot of independent and Democrat-leaning voters are going to split their vote, opening up the door here for the Republicans. So at the end of the day, that's going to close up our map here on my predictions for this governor's races across the board. You can see here at the end, we have 26 for the Democrats, 24 for the Republicans, and there would be a ton of gains if this was the final map for the Democrats in terms of those governorships. We'll see how it plays out, and after we get all of the results, I'll come back and compare it to my prediction map to see how either accurate or inaccurate I was on these predictions. So thanks, guys, for stopping on in. Subscribe for more of this political analysis content, and I hope to see you back here for future videos.